My name is Julie Wilder, and this is Front Porch Radio, where we have conversations for the common good. It's just a little something that we like to do around here. And, there's a lot going on in the world. And this week is a lot of people are on vacation, maybe going home, maybe dreading going home, maybe staying home because they don't want to deal with family this Thanksgiving. But it is Thanksgiving that's coming up. And one of the things that I learned, it was like a long time ago, decades ago. But it blew my mind because I had read a book called "Lies Your History Teacher Told You," and it wasn't even in that book. And it was about the founding of our nation, and the fact that essentially the United States democracy is actually the second democracy to be formed on this land. And the first democracy was the Haudenosaunee democracy. And our democracy is in fact based on their democracy with some very vital edits. Mainly their democracy, women held a lot of power. It wasn't a thing to not hold power. It wasn't even a concept. And so I'm going to play a couple of short videos today just to kind of get you all up to date on some of the hidden history of the United States. And I know we're at a very interesting time. A lot of people are concerned about the state of our democracy. And it should be very illuminating and interesting for you. So I'm going to just play this first bit. It's about 6 minutes long, and it's about the Great Law. It's from Vision Maker Media, and I hope you have your mind blown. I mean, I hope you know this, but I'm going to guarantee you don't. So let's just go for it.
There is a story about a total eclipse at the time of its creation. And at that time, if a person was killed by someone in another clan or in another nation, then you were bound to go and kill or capture at least one person from the group that did that. Hiawatha was a skilled speaker, speech maker, and so on. And he met up with Daganoweda, who some people say was a stutterer, but who had all these great ideas. And in one version of the story, they joined forces to try and stop the blood feuds. They then enunciated the Great Law. There is significant influence on the development of American government by Iroquois, Haudenosaunee people. The direct influences are the idea of separation of powers, sovereignty in the people, that's we the people. Also, of course, the notion of federalism. The Great Law of Peace maintained peace within the Six Nations, but also developed a model for defense of the Six Nations from external powers. And that, of course, was very interesting to the 13 colonies. Benjamin Franklin published a book called Indian Treaties. In them were speeches by Haudenosaunee and other Native American leaders about peace, about government, and so on. In one instance, in a treaty in Pennsylvania, an Iroquois chief said, you should think seriously about uniting along the lines like us. Then, at the Albany Plan of Union in 1754, Franklin uses that as a model and develops the first plan for the union of the colonies. There is a group of Iroquois chiefs that come to Philadelphia, and they are actually sleeping on the second floor of Independence Hall. John Hancock is presiding over the Continental Congress at the time, and the Iroquois had been invited earlier to come down and view this new Continental Congress, and after looking for several weeks, they then make John Hancock the Great Tree. In 1785, when there's great frustration in the government and with the Articles of Confederation, three guys say, we need to go and examine the Iroquois more closely and then bring that back, and maybe we can construct a new constitution. Those three guys are Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, James Monroe. Jefferson becomes the ambassador to the French, and with Monroe, Madison goes and he rejoins his friend the Grasshopper, who's an Oneida chief who he had known for a long time.
For more information about Ingenuity and other ITVS programs, visit ITVS at itvs.org.
Yeah. So I hope you were able to follow that. It is part of the documented history of the Haudenosaunee, also referred to the French called them the Iroquois, so you might be familiar with that, but it was a group of six essentially nations that formed a confederacy in the Northeast, so kind of like the New York area. And this is not a complete secret. There are, as you heard, a lot of there's documents and paperwork and reporting at that time in history about the Haudenosaunee influence. And it's just something that has not been taught in our schools. And so one of the things that a lot of people are not really aware of is that this idea of the home of the free, that is rooted in the fact that the native people that were here, at least in that Northeast area, because there's many different tribes, but they had a functional democracy, and they had separation of powers. But the key difference was that women held power in the Native American tribes. They were matrilineal, and so it wasn't matriarchal as you might suspect, like the opposite inverse of patriarchy. But it was matrilineal. So you were born into a clan, and then when you were born into that clan, you were born into your mother's clan. And so women were free. They were not property or anything like that. So I'm going to read an excerpt right now because this also ties into the roots of feminism. Because at that time, of course, and in many ways today, women were not free. We still do not even have the Equal Rights Amendment. So I'm going to read to you an excerpt from As Long as the Grass Grows, the Indigenous Fight for Environmental Justice from Colonization to Standing Rights, to Standing Rock, I'm sorry. So let's go. Long before there was ever a concept called feminism in the U.S. settler state, there was the knowledge of women's power in indigenous communities. The imposition of foreign cultures and Christianity in particular was corrosive to societies that were typically matrilineal or matrifocal, were foundationally equitable in the distribution of power between the genders, and often respected the existence of a third gender and non-hetero relationships. As Christianity swept over the continent, it instilled indigenous societies with patriarchal values that sought not only to diminish women's inherent cultural power, but also to pathologize, alternative gender identities, relationships, and marriage practices outside the bounds of monogamy, establishing a general pattern of gender and relationship suppression that constructs modern American society and reordered Native societies. Feminism as we know it today is a concept that emerged primarily from the experience of white settler women in the mid-19th century. Historically, European women were little more than the property of men and did not have the same political rights as men did, such as the right to vote or own property. Once they were married, they had no rights to their own bodies or even to their children, amounting to no legal existence, as feminist historian Sally Roche Wagner recounts. So it was logical that their struggles focused on the ability to achieve equality, which would mean, among other things, legal standing and rights. Less well recognized today is the way early women's rights activists were shaped by the American Indians. Studying the writing of some of the earliest recognized founders of the feminist movement, such as Lucretia Mott, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and Matilda Jocelyn Gage, Wagner noted that the ways they were influenced by the Haudenosaunee, or the Iroquois cultures, with whom they were neighbors in the Northeast. These settler women observed the Haudenosaunee women were free from constrictive, tortuous clothing, were farmers, played sports, owned property, and were free from rape and other violence. They were not the property of men. Haudenosaunee women were highly respected in their societies, and a clan mother society guided much of the governance of the Haudenosaunee Six Nations Confederacy by choosing and overseeing the male chiefs. In Haudenosaunee society, children's identity was inherited through the mother's clan, compared to Western societies which trace identity patrilineally, making the concept of illegitimate children completely foreign. This meant that women had far more control over their bodies than did their white counterparts. While there were norms that governed Haudenosaunee life, women's sexuality was not policed and condemned the way white women's was. White women, in other words, were fighting for the social equity that most Native women traditionally enjoyed in their societies. The work of white women activists in the 19th century, often referred to as first wave feminism, gradually bore fruit, and by 1920 white women had the right to vote. But paradoxically, while white women were gaining rights, Native women's rights were still being eroded through centuries of forced assimilation into the U.S. political landscape. The bestowal of citizenship upon Americans Indians in 1924, for example, was and still is to an extent controversial in Indian country. For the federal government, citizenship was a strategy of assimilation, but it was also advocated by the Society of American Indians, the first Indian-run rights organization, which was in existence from 1911 to 1923. Citizenship was one of the SAI's primary agenda issues and was viewed as a mechanism to advance Indian status beyond wards of the government and a fight for the place as full, modern, and dynamic participants in American life. But as Wagner also points out, many Haudenosaunee women opposed citizenship because it would subject Native women to the same legal system that continued to oppress white women after suffrage. So I think that it's really important that we look at our history, especially right now, with everything that is going on. There is so much that we don't know about the founding of our nation, about the true origins. Obviously there was this, they call it the doctrine of discovery, which, if you've been paying any attention, you know that Christopher Columbus did not discover, he didn't come here and it was just this barren land. Of course, there had been native societies here for centuries and centuries and centuries, very advanced societies, ones with clearly, clear democracies and confederacies and full functioning ways and means of doing things. So I'm going to play another clip just to kind of give a voice, allow some Native Americans to tell it in their own words.
We We are the Haudenosaunee. We're the people of the Longhouse. A lot of people refer to us as the Iroquois or the Six Nations. The Iroquois actually is a French word to describe us. And Six Nations obviously is English. But the Haudenosaunee, that means that we're the people of the Longhouse. The Haudenosaunee have the oldest continuous democracy anywhere in the world. In addition to that, we are matrilineal. It's always been this way.
Women play an important role in Haudenosaunee culture because the structure of the communities and society is built on clans, and every individual who is Haudenosaunee inherits their clan through their mother. The village in its entirety, including the fields of corn and other vegetables, the entirety of the village, the footprint of that place, ends up being the responsibility of women. They're the ones organizing it. They're the ones providing the leadership structures. There's male counterparts and there's male leadership too, but within the town, the woman's voice is primary.
It's really important to note that the Founding Fathers actually came and studied among the Haudenosaunee. When you look at the U.S. government, you can really see the Haudenosaunee governance structure underneath all of that. So you have your three different sides of your government. In addition to that, you have your state levels and you have your federal levels. And when you look at the way the Haudenosaunee are structured, you can see that. You see the three different sides in terms of how we make decisions. You can also see the state levels. You know, the clan mothers are the ones who are there for the people. They're there for the communities. They listen to the voice of the people. And they take that then, what, the people want, and they take that then to the chiefs. And the chiefs then all meet among all of our Six Nations together, and they are the representatives of the people. And they meet together to discuss and decide decisions for our Confederacy. The U.S. government is rooted in Haudenosaunee culture, Haudenosaunee governance, Haudenosaunee ways of life. But what the Founding Fathers left out was the role of women. When you think about the Haudenosaunee form of governance, the reason that it works is because women are at the core of it. You have clan mothers who are really the decision makers for the people. They are the ones who inform the chiefs. This is what you're going to say. This is the interest you're going to represent when you go to represent us in council. He can't deviate from that. Because when a chief deviates from that and begins to act in his own self-interest, the clan mother has the right to remove him from that position as a chief.
Haudenosaunee women, their period of suffrage took place 1,000 years ago, right? And so they've enjoyed, in a way, this sort of balance and equity ever since. It really was the Europeans who came here who started to effect and infect Native communities with a patriarchal mindset. So Haudenosaunee women of that time period understood and knew and functioned within that traditional paradigm still. And so they were never lacking for equity. I mean, that idea alone had to have been inspirational to the American women's suffrage movement.
And indeed it was. So you were today years old when you discovered that, unbeknownst to you, there was a fully functioning democracy on what we call the United States of America and what many natives refer to as Turtle Island. And it was based on a couple of the key differences were that the native peoples did not have a concept of actual property in terms of land ownership. It was essentially considered the commons, and it was something to be stewarded. This idea of ownership and a little piece of paper that tells you own a plot of land is not. It was not a concept that they followed. They had territories and they had boundaries. in between the nations, of course, but the land was considered a commons. Of course, that was the complete opposite of the way that the colonizers and the settlers viewed land from their way. And so you had this society which was had where everybody in the community had power. Women had power, men had power. They had a system and a process for going through, disputes and making decisions for the people. And they also had, what we would call non-traditional relationships. So heteronormativity wasn't, the thing. There was, of course, heterosexual relationships, but there were also, homosexual relationships as well that were completely accepted. What we call transgender people, they openly embraced as two-spirit. And they had a bunch of different alternative structures. And so, so then when our democracy was installed, it was based on essentially the Puritan colonizers and settlers, purity for women as property. Of course, women weren't property. Land was not property for the Haudenosaunee. That was not a thing. There was just mutual care and stewardship for the greater good. So that's something I want everyone to know about, not only because, hey, it's just a really important slice of our history and something that the record needs to have corrected, but also as we are thinking about democracy and as we're thinking about how to transform democracy here in the United States, thinking that we have the greatest form of democracy that's ever existed, because we like to be American exceptionalism, right? Is just the idea that maybe there are other forms of democracy that got it right. They were living peacefully for the most part. Now, part of that was also is that they didn't always live peacefully. There was a character that was very much called the peacemaker, and basically brought about and stopped a lot of infighting that was going on, very revenge-based, eye for an eye kind of stuff. And that's how the Great Law of Peace came about. And it's interesting because there was I think we heard at the beginning that eclipse at the beginning of the clip, they referred to an eclipse that happened in the Americas. And what was very interesting to me is when we had that total eclipse that went through America last year, there was a lot of chatter in Native American communities saying that it was a very similar placement of planets to when that original eclipse happened that brought about their own democracy. And so they saw it as an interesting sign that we're going to be able to have an opportunity to bring peace. Of course, it doesn't always come immediately, but it'll be very interesting to see how we can move forward. I know that we were looking forward to maybe having a woman president, some of us, and it's no big shock to a lot of women that somebody as just patriarchal and whatever else that Trump is, of course, two women lost to him, not necessarily the popular vote in the case of Hillary, and one guy won against him, and it's just like, I wonder what the theme is there. I wonder why Joe Biden won and Kamala and Hillary did not. Yes, we can talk about the electoral system all day long. But those are some things to be considering and thinking about. And as we walk into Thanksgiving, I really encourage you to look up those videos. I've put it on the Front Porch Radio Facebook page. And it is going to be a good discussion point. They're just, both of those videos are less than 10 minutes. But they are the most mind-blowing 10 minutes that anyone at your dinner table will be able to have. And I think it's really going to spark some really good conversations about power distribution, about democracy, about just the critical mistakes, intentional mistakes built into the design of our own democracy that has, given us quite a bit of progress. The structure of democracy itself has given us quite a bit of progress over time, but it's very, very, very slow because it's not actually truly a representative democracy, and hasn't been. One of the interesting things about looking at the Haudenosaunee structure of governance versus the United States is that their Supreme Court was the clan mothers. It was 100% women. And now the other structures were men and women together, but the Supreme Court for them was 100% women. And I just think that that's so interesting because we have had a very long run of a mostly male Supreme Court, and of course mostly majority male Supreme Court this entire time. So yeah, just a little bit of knowledge for you. I hope that we can find ways to think about things a little bit differently as we move forward. I know one of the explorations that I'm going to be having here on the program in the coming months is just to look about essentially the psyche and psychology. And it wasn't until I became a parent that I really, when you got a toddler, you got to figure out some stuff, man, because they will, the way those little munchkins are acting, like you got to become a psychologist. And there are different types of mindset, and I have a theory. I have like an Excel spreadsheet because I'm a real geek about this stuff. But I have an Excel spreadsheet that is kind of mapping out the stages of psychological maturity with the stages of, essentially spiritual enlightenment, as well as, the different mindset that is had in each one. And one of the things that has been just kind of gone back and forth about in the wake of this election result is just, how, there people are who are like, hey, I'm voting for harm reduction. I'm voting to make sure that things like racism and sexism and misogyny don't continue to grow. Then there are other people who they're voting their self-interest primarily. And so there's just been this big struggle with understanding that. And if you actually look at and understand psychology, there is a distinct kind of line where if you're not supported in the right way, or if you've had some kind of trauma happen to you when you're younger, you don't actually get to mature past a certain age group. So even though your body grows and maybe you can go out and get a job, there is an emotional maturity or psychologically develop. That's why they call it arrested development. Like you just kind of stop developing in your psyche. And so there are people that they move from the baby stage to the toddler stage to the child stage to the teen stage, and then the young adult stage, and then the adult stage. And at every stage they are growing and developing and maturing. And then there are those that get stuck. Maybe they had a trauma happen to them a certain age, or they weren't properly feeling safe and secure as a child because of just an unstable household or abusive parents or whatever it is. And so when that happens, you kind of get stuck in this psychological state. And then when you're in those different states, say a toddler or a teenager, somebody that hasn't been taught about compassion or hasn't been told that bullying is wrong, they get stuck in this in this state where they are basically outsourcing their power to an outside authority figure, because when you're young, you are literally dependent. Especially now, we can't just, a 5-year-old can't just make it through the world on their own, right? They have to have grown-ups helping them make it through the world, right? And let's face it, teenagers too, they need some help. And so the way that the psyche is developed is to essentially imprint onto an authority figure that is going to provide safety. And so even if that authority figure is an unsafe person, like in the case being raised in an abusive household, they are still the person that's going to like feed you and get you, keep you alive. And so you have to learn how to survive being dependent on essentially an abusive partner or an abusive authority figure. And so that is something that is being exploited right now in our nation. Is this psychological state that most people return to when they're scared. If you've ever been triggered by something, right? You know that your mind kind of travels back into time to when you were a little kid or something like that. You're not able to always, keep your cool or level-headed or be self-possessed, right? So we can all travel back to a pre-adult stage when we're really, really triggered by something. And that's why it's so important to understand that, because when we are in a state of constant fear or catastrophizing, first of all, we're not self-possessed and we can't think straight about what to do next. We also don't remember that we are at choice and that we are actually the adults in the room and we can make decisions about where to step next. And so it becomes very easy to then outsource your power to an outside authority figure because you think that they're going to keep you safe. And that is a big, big theme that has been going around in our nation. And it's a truly over entitled but disempowered nation in a lot of ways. And because the thing is about power is that you have to participate in it. That's why democracy is a participatory thing, and it works based on who's participating, right? Now, there's a lot of reasons why we don't have participation, including legal reasons that have taken many years and centuries to get over. But not voting is a lack of participation. Not taking full advantage of the powers that we do have is important. And you know what? There's a lot of people that are overworked. I mean, there's so many reasons why people don't participate. Really good reasons why people don't participate, right? And so, people are exhausted. They're tired. They're raising their kids. They're trying to do this. They're trying to do that. And it wears you down, and it's hard to get to a point of participating when all of that is going on, especially when you don't feel like you see somebody that represents you fully and completely in the political arena. And so and yet, participation is the name of the game. And one of the ways that I have seen people growing in their power has been the revival of small businesses, because the dependency on corporation employment, the dependency on military employment, those different kinds of things have created a disempowered, maybe there's fiscal power there, but there isn't actual authoritative understandings of power dynamics by being in a power position as a leader. And a lot of times, small business ownership is a path to understanding power. It's certainly a path to participation. It's certainly a path to understanding responsibility. And of course, some people misuse those powers, but a lot of people have been gaining power by being independent, workers. Artists and musicians have known this for a long time. They have been able to use their power and decision making to make the choices that they want for themselves in terms of creative direction and different things like that. So anytime that you are creating something or leading something, or you are familiar with power, and that is something that we all need to be getting familiar with and participating in, whether it be from owning our own businesses or getting involved in politics. Certainly, just showing up to vote. Those are the kinds of things that are important for us to understand as we go forward. So if you're just tuning in, this is Front Porch Radio. I'm Julie Wilder, and I've been talking today on the week of Thanksgiving. Played some really great videos. I guess soundtracks for you guys that are on my Front Porch Radio Facebook page about the democracy that our democracy is based on, the Haudenosaunee democracy, which was a confederacy in the New York region, is the easiest way to say that. And our democracy was founded on it. And it's really cool to know that history. It blows your mind. It really changes your perspective on everything, especially when you have to dig even further to find out the information about how the women were free and how that created the feminist movement, the suffragette movement in America, because that was mind-blowing to see that women were not property and were free and had power and ran the commerce and all different kinds of things. So definitely hoping that you guys have a great Thanksgiving and that you are able to talk about these issues, because Thanksgiving, I'm a big believer in gathering around food and celebrating with people no matter what. And so I am not totally cool. I know a lot of people have decided not to participate in Thanksgiving as a way to, talk about colonialism and not participate in it. And I like to use it as a way to celebrate and educate and inform people around my dinner table about the incredible example that was here before us, that we, of course, were not very nice to after they helped us in many ways from our government and get free from colonial rule ourselves. So that's another chapter for another day. But right now, I think if we can just really, really focus on just considering the origins of democracy here in the United States, discovering the history that you are not, I guarantee you, not being taught in any of your classes. I hope that was helpful for you guys. And I am very, 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 very excited to be able to have a microphone to be able to share those kinds of things, because sometimes I feel like I have all of this information and nowhere to actually share it. So anyway, I hope that you guys have a great holiday. I'm going to kind of end early and just play music the rest of the way. And if you like this, join in